A forgotten tablet holds a secret that could shatter history. This is the story of the Forgotten Beasts of Arda and the ages they dominated. I would love to know where you are listening from right now and what the local time is for you. Please share that in the comments. Lyra, a young scholar of ancient lore, discovered this tablet buried deep in the university archives. It depicted a creature so immense and alien, it defied all known classification. Her mentor called it a dangerous myth and ordered her to stop her research, but the image was burned into her mind, a ghost from a lost age demanding to be remembered. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, Lyra made a choice. She would defy direct orders and risk her entire career to uncover the truth. The secrets she sought were not just academic. They held the power to rewrite everything we know about the world's creation. By the end of this journey, you will understand the true fate of these legendary beings and the cycles of power that shaped our world. What ancient truth lies buried beneath the comforting stories we tell ourselves? Lyra's fingers trace the cold, unfamiliar symbols on the tablet, laid into the night. Her only companions, the dust motes, dancing in the lamplight. She knew the university's sealed archives held the only texts that might offer a translation, texts she was forbidden to even touch. Risking everything, she slipped past the main collections into the silent, restricted vaults. There, under the watchful eyes of painted saints and forgotten kings, she found it. A crumbling scroll mentioned an epoch lost to all common histories, the age of the Sky Titans, and named the creature from her tablet. Its name was Ural, the World-Defiler. The words described it not as a simple monster, but as a force that could scorch continents and reshape mountains. The discovery was a key turning in a lock no one else remembered existed, but the turning of a key makes a sound. A senior archivist, drawn by the flicker of her lone lamp in the forbidden dark, found her there. He did not ask questions. He simply took her notes, his face a mask of cold disappointment as he issued a formal reprimand that felt like a death sentence for her career. The choice before her was stark and immediate. She could obey, return to her sanctioned studies, and let the ghost of Ural fade back into myth, or she could defy them all. In the moments before the archivist returned to escort her out, Lyra committed the crucial passage to memory, etching every word and symbol into her mind with desperate focus. She fled the archives not as a scholar, but as a renegade, her future at the university severed with finality, now marked as an outcast, cut off from all institutional resources and allies. She had only a name and a memory to guide her. That memory pointed her toward a single, desperate hope, the reclusive cartographer Kalin, a man said to live where the land meets the endless sea, on the misty cliffs of the Whispering Coast. The journey to the Whispering Coast was a trial of wind and water. Lyra fought her way along crumbling cliff paths, the sea a roaring, gray beast far below, its salt spray stinging her eyes. The lighthouse stood like a lonely, defiant bone, a stark white spire against the churning sky. Its keeper, Kalin, was a man carved from the same harsh stone as his home, his eyes narrowed with a lifetime of suspicion. He barred his door, shouting over the gale that he wanted no visitors and cared nothing for the mad quests of disgraced scholars. Desperation clawed at her, but Lyra did not plead. Instead, she knelt on the wet rock, and with a piece of charcoal from her spent fire, drew the symbol from her memory, the angular, impossible form of Ural, the World-Defiler. The wind threatened to tear the image away, but its brief existence on the stone changed everything. Kalin's hostility crumbled into a haunted recognition. He pulled her inside, his hands trembling not from the cold, but from fear. He confessed he had spent decades trying to forget the things he had seen, the fragments of maps and lore that pointed to a time when such beings were the masters of the world. His fear was a living thing in the small, cluttered room. He believed that seeking out the remnants of these ages was not a scholarly pursuit, but a summoning, a beacon that could call old shadows back into the light. Some knowledge, he insisted, was a lock that should never be turned. Lyra looked at the old man, seeing not a paranoid recluse, but a guardian burdened by a terrible truth. She made him a vow, not as a scholar to a source, but as one soul to another. She promised she sought only to understand, to give the forgotten beasts the dignity of memory, not to harness their lost power. It was this sincerity, this raw need for truth over dominion, that finally broke through his dread. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the years, Kalin went to a hidden compartment in the floorboards. He produced a piece of ancient, oiled leather, a map fragment so old the lines seemed to pulse with a faint energy. It depicted a lonely island shrouded in perpetual mist, and at its heart, a marking for the Chamber of Echoes, a place said to hold not written histories, but the very voices of the past, preserved in stone like insects in amber. But his trust came with a grave warning. He told her she was not the first to come asking, and others who sought this knowledge did so with fire and shadow in their hearts. Her inquiries had already drawn attention, and unseen watchers now tracked her movements. The quest was no longer just a race against time, but a flight from a growing darkness. With the map secured against her heart, Lyra secured passage on a small, weather-beaten fishing vessel, its captain a man of few words and fewer questions. As the lighthouse faded into the mist behind her, she watched the horizon where the sea and sky bled into a single, gray emptiness. Her destination was the desolate Isle of Mists, a place that did not welcome visitors, where the Chamber of Echoes waited, silent and patient, holding the answers she so desperately needed. The sea did not give up its secrets easily. Lyra's small boat shattered against the island's hidden teeth. The splintering would a violent crack against the relentless thunder of waves. She was thrown into the churning, ice-cold water, the weight of her pack threatening to drag her down into the blackness. Something sleek and scaled brushed against her leg in the murk, a territorial presence that spurred her to a desperate, frantic swim. Her lungs burned as she fought the current, finally stumbling onto the gritty shore of a sea cave, her body trembling with cold and terror. She was alive, but nearly empty-handed. Her supplies were lost to the sea, leaving her with only the clothes on her back and the precious, oilskin-wrapped map pressed against her chest. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering into the cavern, she saw them. The walls were not smooth stone. They were a gallery of giants, covered in carvings so ancient the rock itself seemed to remember the shapes. Here was Ural, its vast wings spread across an entire continent of stone. Beside it were other forms, leviathans of the deep and behemoths of the earth, all depicted in their terrible prime. This was not myth. This was a record. The sheer scale of the artistry confirmed everything she had dared to believe. Her path forward, however, was a labyrinth. The cave system split into multiple dark passages, and a low, guttural hissing echoed from one of the tunnels, a clear warning from a creature that saw her as an intruder. She had to move quickly and quietly. Then she saw it, carved beside the entrance to the widest tunnel, a string of symbols in a dialect so old it was barely a language. It was a riddle, a final test for any who made it this far. The words spoke of a heart that beats without life, a mountain's core that holds the world's first breath. Her mind, trained in dead tongues, scrambled for the meaning, the heart of the mountain. It had to be the Chamber of Echoes, a place deep within the island's core. Choosing to trust her translation was a leap of faith into the consuming dark. With one last glance toward the cave entrance and the dangerous freedom of the sea, she turned her back on the light. Each step deeper into the earth felt like a step backward in time, the air growing still and heavy. The carvings continued, showing the great beasts not just as forces of destruction, but as shapers of lands, as living continents whose movements carved valleys and whose breath seeded the skies. The weight of their lost dominion settled on her shoulders. This was no longer just her personal quest for truth. She felt like a single thread being pulled into a vast, ancient tapestry, a story of power and extinction that demanded a witness. Her fingers traced the final symbol of the riddle, a glyph for listening. As she pressed it, a deep grinding sound vibrated through the stone floor. A section of the wall, perfectly seamless moments before, slid inward and then sideways, revealing a steep, descending stairway hewn from the living rock. The air that wafted up from the darkness was dry and carried a strange, faint sound that made the hairs on her arm stand on end. It was a soft, melodic humming, a tune without a source, beckoning her downward into the deep dark. The humming resolved into a symphony of whispers as Lyra descended into the cavern. The Chamber of Echoes was not a room of stone, but of light and memory. The walls themselves shimmered, a kaleidoscope of captured moments that pulsed with a soft, internal glow. It was not a library of scrolls, but a living archive of experience. Before she could even steady her breath, the chamber seized her consciousness. The world dissolved into a torrent of sensation. She was no longer a Lyra, the scholar. She was the sky. She felt the colossal stretch of wings that could eclipse the sun, the rush of thin, cold air through impossible lungs, and the raw, tectonic power that coursed through a form older than the mountains below. This was Ural, not as a carving, but as a living, feeling being. The sheer scale of its existence was a physical pressure, threatening to shatter her mind. Beneath the godlike power, however, flowed a deep and ancient sorrow, a loneliness so profound it felt like a void in the heart of the world. Her own sense of self began to fray at the edges, pulled apart by the chaotic storm of another's life. She was drowning in the echo. To lose focus was to be unmade, her identity scattered into a billion shimmering fragments on the wall. With a desperate act of will, she anchored her mind to a single, burning question. What ended you? She pushed past the glory of flight, past the raw dominion over creation, seeking the final moment. The memory that answered was not of a climactic battle against heroes or gods. It was a choice. She felt Ural's will turn inward, a conscious, deliberate act of unraveling. The great beast did not fall to a rival's power. It sacrificed itself, pulling its own essence apart in a silent, cataclysmic act that stilled the raging elements and calmed the newborn world, allowing a new, gentler age to begin. The purpose of its end was not defeat, but creation, but a being of such power cannot be truly destroyed. The vision showed its core essence, its Heartstone, splintered into fragments and hidden across the world, a secret buried to protect the future from both its power and its sorrow. This was the dangerous truth Kalin feared. This was the power the unseen watchers sought not to understand, but to possess and wield. As the overwhelming presence of Ural began to fade from her mind, leaving her trembling and hollowed out, a new resonance stirred within the chamber. The shimmering light on the walls coalesced into a different hue, a deep, resonant brown. From the silence rose a new echo, a low, grinding rumble that was not a sound, but a feeling of immense, patient weight. It was the call of Grond, not of the sky, but of the deep and unyielding earth. The deep, grinding resonance of the earth filled her mind, pulling her from the fading sorrow of the sky into an even more immense and patient consciousness. She was no longer a creature of air, but of stone. Lyra felt the impossible weight of ages, the slow, deliberate pulse of a being whose thoughts moved at the speed of continental drift. This was Grond, the earth mover. Its memories were not a flight, but a foundation, of pushing vast plates of the world together to birth mountain ranges and carving deep ocean trenches with its passage. The very ground beneath her feet was its legacy. She felt its profound, silent purpose, a will to shape and order the chaos of the young world. The vision shifted, showing the great beast's final moments. It did not fall in battle. As the world stabilized, its work complete, Grond settled into the heart of the greatest mountain chain it had ever raised. Then, with a final, deliberate act of will, it called the stone to itself. The very peaks it had created folded over it, not as a tomb, but as a mantle, a self-imposed prison of rock that sealed its power away from the fragile world above. It was a willing entombment, a sacrifice for a future it would never see. The pattern was now terrifyingly clear. Urul's self-sacrifice had calmed the violent skies. Grond's self-entombment had stilled the restless earth. These were not defeats. They were a series of deliberate conclusions, a cycle where the dominant power of each age stepped aside or was sealed away to allow the next chapter of life to flourish. This was not random chance. The visions carried faint impressions of other presences, watchers who facilitated these transitions, a forgotten order of guardians who ensured the cycle continued. The moral weight of this knowledge settled upon Lyra like the mountain upon Grond. Was this truth a sacred trust to be preserved, or a dangerous secret to be buried once more? To seek out these slumbering powers was to risk waking them, yet to leave them entirely forgotten was to ignore a fundamental law of the world, a law that, if broken, could lead to a cataclysm beyond imagination. Her path was no longer a choice. She had to learn the fate of all the forgotten beasts. Only by understanding the full cycle, its rules and its guardians, could she hope to prevent its catastrophic breakdown. If the cycle failed now, with no one to remember it, what would stop a power like Ural or Grond from awakening into a world unprepared for their return? But the chamber of echoes was dying. The shimmering lights on the walls flickered, and the whispers began to fade into a distorted static. The energy that preserved these memories was draining away, and she knew if she did not leave now, she would be trapped in this dying archive, her own mind added to the fading echoes. As she turned to flee, one last, weak pulse of light flared against the wall. It was not a complex memory, but a single, stark symbol. A great tree with a serpent coiled protectively around its trunk, their forms intertwined. She burned the image into her mind, a final clue from the past. Then she ran, stumbling up the stone stairs as the chamber groaned and shuddered around her. Rocks clattered down from the ceiling, and the melodic humming twisted into a dissonant shriek of collapsing energy. She burst out into the upper cave system, just as a final, thunderous roar sealed the entrance to the Chamber of Echoes forever, leaving her alone in the semi-darkness with the ghost of a symbol and the burden of a broken cycle. The mainland felt alien after the raw truth of the island. Lyra moved through crowded streets with a new awareness, her mind still echoing with the self-sacrifice of giants. The symbol of the tree and serpent was her only compass, a single thread of hope in a world that felt dangerously fragile. She knew such symbols were often adopted by those who dealt in remedies and protective charms, so she began a methodical, desperate search of every herbalist and alchemist she could find. Most shops yielded nothing but puzzled looks and bundles of common herbs. Days turned into a week, her hope thinning with her coin purse. Then, in a quiet alley, perfumed with damp earth and drying flowers, she saw it. Carved into the weathered lintel of a narrow, unassuming door was the exact intertwining tree and serpent. This was no ordinary apothecary. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rare resins and aged paper. The woman behind the counter, Lyra, had eyes that held a depth of knowledge far beyond simple herb lore. She watched Lyra with a stillness that was both patient and deeply wary. When Lyra pointed to the symbol on the door, Lyra's demeanor shifted from that of a shopkeeper to something else entirely, a sentinel. She did not deny the connection. Instead, she confirmed it, her voice low and measured. She was a descendant of the Guardians, one of the last who remembered the old purpose, to watch and to ensure the cycle of ages remained unbroken. But trust was not given. It had to be earned. Lyra tested her, posing riddles of intent and morality, watching her eyes for any flicker of ambition or greed. She asked why a scholar would risk so much for mere stories. Lyra's answer did not come from a place of academic pride. She spoke of the visceral sorrow she had felt within Ural, the profound, willing silence of Grond. She described not the power of the beasts, but the beautiful, terrifying worlds they had shaped and then willingly abandoned for the sake of what was to come. She spoke of their sacrifice as a form of love for a creation they would never know. It was this raw empathy, this reverence for the lost, that finally convinced Lyra. The wall of suspicion crumbled, replaced by a grim solidarity. The truth Lyra shared next turned Lyra's theoretical fear into a chilling, immediate reality. The unseen watchers Kalin had warned her about had a name, the Seekers of Ascendancy. This shadowy faction had spent generations piecing together the same forbidden lore, but with a horrifyingly different goal. They did not seek understanding, they sought control. They believed the Heartstones of the Forgotten Beasts could be used not just to awaken them, but to bind them, to harness their world-shattering power as a weapon. And they were close. Their agents were scouring the northern wastes, following a trail of geomantic resonance that pointed directly to the hidden resting place of Ural's Heartstone. The race was no longer academic. It was for the fate of the world itself. Seeing the resolve in Alara's eyes, Lyra made a decision. She would take her to the heart of what remained of the Guardian Order, a hidden enclave deep within the Sunken woods, where the eldest of their kind, a man known as the Silius, safeguarded the most complete histories of the ages. It was their only hope of learning how the cycle was meant to be protected, and how to stop the Seekers before they unleashed a power that would shatter the world a second time. The Sunken Woods lived up to their name, a drowned world of gnarled roots and hanging moss where the very air felt thick and resistant. Paths shifted behind them, branches twisting to block their way, as if the forest itself was a living, breathing maze designed to repel intruders. Lyra moved with an instinctual grace, her steps sure on the unstable ground, but she constantly looked to Alara for confirmation. The key to navigation was not sight, but a harmony of their knowledge. Lyra's understanding of the wood's living magic and Alara's recall of the directional chants preserved in the Chamber of Echoes. They had to trust each other completely, their survival depending on a perfect, silent cooperation. A low, pained growl rumbled from the shadows ahead, a sound that was less a threat and more a deep, resonant agony. The creature that shambled into a patch of sickly green light was a thing of twisted sorrow. It had the general shape of a great forest bear, but its fur was patchy, its flesh swollen with pulsing, unnatural growths that seeped a dark ichor. Its eyes held no malice, only a profound and confused suffering. This was no natural beast. Lyra's face hardened with a cold fury. She whispered that this was the work of the Seekers, a crude experiment where they had tried to force a fragment of captured beast essence into a living creature. They had created a vessel for power that could not contain it, a victim of their reckless ambition. The corrupted bear charged, not with predatory intent, but with the blind, spasmodic rage of its constant pain. Lyra moved to intercept, her staff a blur as she deflected its clumsy, powerful swipes. She could not strike to kill, only to defend, her movements a desperate dance to keep them both alive. Alara stood frozen for a heartbeat, the chaotic memories of the echoes swirling in her mind. Then, through the storm of sensation, a single, clear thread emerged. A low, resonant hum, a chant of calming used by the earliest life to soothe the raging elements. It was a song for a world in pain. Her voice, thin and trembling at first, rose in the clearing. She sang not in words, but in pure, tonal syllables that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. The effect was immediate. The bear faltered, its head cocking as the foreign sounds washed over it. The blind rage in its eyes flickered, replaced by a moment of bewildered recognition. It was a memory of peace, a ghost of what it once was. As Lyra held the creature at bay, Alara did not reach for a weapon. She knelt, pulling a small clay jar from Lyra's pack, a guardian salve meant for healing the forest's wounds. She approached the now stilled beast, her heart hammering against her ribs, and gently applied the pungent ointment to one of the weeping growths. It was an act of profound compassion, a choice to heal a weapon meant to destroy them. The bear shuddered, a great sigh escaping its lungs. The violent tension drained from its massive body, and it looked at Alara with an intelligence that was entirely its own, a silent, grateful acknowledgement. Then it turned and lumbered away, its pain eased, if not fully cured. Lyra watched it go, her expression one of stunned respect. The bond between them was now forged in something stronger than shared purpose. It was sealed in mutual trust and a shared morality. The Seeker's poison was already spreading, corrupting the natural world. This was no longer a distant threat. It was a personal wound. As the healed creature disappeared into the thick foliage, it brushed against a curtain of hanging vines, revealing a path that had been utterly concealed moments before. The way was clear, a gift for an act of mercy. The hidden path led directly toward the heart of the woods, and the last sanctuary of the Guardians. The heart of the Sunken Woods was a sanctuary of profound silence. Ancient trees formed a natural cathedral, their canopy so dense the light fell in soft, green pillars. In the center sat Thuron, the elder guardian, a man so old he seemed more a part of the forest than a visitor to it. His eyes, milky with age, did not see Lyra, but looked through her. A pressure built in her mind, not an invasion, but an invitation. His voice resonated directly within her thoughts, asking no questions, but simply witnessing. He sifted through the echoes of Ural's sorrow and Grond's sacrifice that still resonated in her soul, feeling the texture of her intent. He found no greed, no hunger for power, only a scholar's reverence and a protector's resolve. The mental pressure lifted. "You have carried a great weight, child." His voice echoed in the silence. "You have carried it with compassion. You are welcome here." He rose, his movements surprisingly fluid, and led her to a still, black pool, fed by a trickle of water from a mossy stone. "This is the Oracle Pool," he explained. "It does not show one future, but the threads of possibility, shaped by the choices of the present." He instructed her to look into its dark mirror. The water shimmered, and a vision bloomed on its surface. She saw a sky the color of blood and ash. Below it, Ural flew, but it was a hollow, broken thing. Its eyes were vacant, its majestic form jerking like a puppet on strings. Bolts of corrupted energy, channeled by black-robed figures on the ground, the Seekers erupted from its maw, scouring cities from the map and turning fertile lands into fields of glass. This was not the return of a god. It was the unleashing of a mindless, world-ending weapon. The sheer, senseless devastation of it stole the air from her lungs. "I cannot let that happen," Lyra whispered, her voice raw with a new, ferocious certainty. "I will do whatever it takes to stop them." Thuron nodded, a deep sadness in his ageless face. "Then your path leads to the peaks of dawn. There, hidden within the highest spire, lies the Heartstone of Ural. It is protected not by a lock, but by a trial of worthiness. No seeker, for all their cunning and power, has ever passed it. The trial does not test strength or knowledge. It judges the heart. It will reflect your deepest intentions back at you." Many who sought the stone with pure goals have been broken by what they saw in themselves. As Lyra absorbed this, steeling herself for the journey, a young man stepped forward from the circle of watching guardians. He had a practical, earnest look, with eyes that missed nothing. "I know the paths through the foothills," he said, his voice firm. "The Seekers are already there, and their corruption makes the trails treacherous. You should not face the mountains alone. My name is Finn. I will be your guide." The climb was a vertical war against the stone and sky. Each handhold on the sheer cliff face was a victory. Each gust of biting wind, a betrayal trying to pry them loose. For hours, the only sounds were their ragged breaths and the scuff of boots on unforgiving granite. During a brief rest on a narrow ledge, Finn taught her more than just lore. He showed her how to still her mind, to feel for the faint, resonant hum left in the world by the passing of the great beasts, a vibration in the air and stone that was invisible to the untrained senses. It was like learning to hear the heartbeat of the mountain itself. This skill proved vital when the path ahead crumbled without warning, a rock slide tearing a fresh chasm across their route. The mountain was not just steep, it was actively hostile, its defenses forcing them to rely on clever rope work and a deep, mutual trust. Then the trust was tested to its limit. A seemingly solid outcrop gave way under Finn's weight. He fell, a short but brutal drop that ended with a sickening crack against a lower ledge. When Lyra reached him, his leg was bent at a wrong, impossible angle, his face pale with shock and pain. He insisted she turn back, that his injury made him a burden she could not afford. The vision from the oracle pool flashed before her eyes. The burning sky, the enslaved Ural, the world ending not with a roar, but with a silent, obedient scorching. To turn back was to surrender the world to that future. Her choice was a clean, hard break. She secured him in a sheltered crevice with most of their supplies, her voice steady as she promised to return. Leaving him there felt like tearing out a part of herself, but the commitment that fueled her was now a cold, unyielding fire in her chest. Alone, and more vulnerable than ever, she pressed upward, the meditative techniques the only thing keeping her focused against the mountain's relentless opposition. The final stretch was a near vertical scramble, her fingers raw and bleeding. Then, abruptly, the slope ended. She pulled herself over the final lip onto a small, flat expanse at the very summit of the world. There was no grand temple, no intricate carvings, only a simple, solitary archway of weathered gray stone, humming with a low, potent energy that made the air shimmer. This was the entrance. The trial awaited. The archway swallowed her, and the solid mountain vanished. Lyra stood in a world of shifting mist and shadow, a place built not of stone, but of memory and fear. A cold dread, deeper than any she had felt on the cliff face, coiled in her stomach. This was the trial. The first vision rose from the mists, sharp and cruel. She saw herself as an old woman, frail and forgotten in a dusty room, her life's work dismissed as the ravings of a disgraced madwoman. The tablet, Ural, Grond, all of it had been for nothing. The weight of absolute obscurity pressed down on her, the terror that her sacrifices would mean nothing in the end. Her instinct was to scream, to fight this future, to prove it wrong. But she remembered Thuron's words, "The trial judges the heart." So she did not fight. She let the feeling of failure wash over her, cold and absolute. And into that silence, she spoke a simple truth. I would rather be a forgotten guardian of a living world than a celebrated architect of a dead one. The words were not a boast, but an acceptance. The moment she truly meant them, the vision of her aged, failed self shimmered and dissolved like smoke. The mist swirled again, and a new horror took shape. She saw the chamber of echoes, but it was not collapsing. It was bursting with violent, searing light, its delicate memories shattered by the brute force of her own clumsy curiosity. She saw Kalin's lighthouse crumbling into the sea, Finn's broken body lying motionless on the mountain ledge, all direct consequences of her quest. She had not saved knowledge. She had destroyed it and gotten everyone she cared for killed in the process. The guilt was a physical sickness. She wanted to fall to her knees and beg for it to stop. But again, she did not resist. She looked at the carnage she had supposedly caused and acknowledged the terrifying responsibility she carried. "My quest carries risk," she whispered to the illusion. But to turn away from this truth carries a far greater one, the risk of a world unmade. Her acceptance of this burden, of the potential for catastrophic error, caused the second vision to fade. Then came the greatest temptation. The mist solidified into the grand hall of the university that had cast her out. The senior archivist who had reprimanded her was there, but he was bowing. All her former colleagues were applauding. On a velvet cushion lay a freshly printed book, its title embossed in gold, her name shining beneath it, The Forgotten Beasts of Arda by Lyra. It was everything she had ever wanted as a scholar: vindication, acclaim, a legacy. A figure stepped from the shadows, a man in the black robes of a seeker, his face hidden but his voice smooth and reasonable. "The Heartstone is the final proof," he said. "Give it to us, and this is all yours. Your name will be remembered forever. Your theories will become the foundation of a new age of knowledge. You will never be obscure or forgotten again." The offer was a key to every locked door in her life. It was so profoundly seductive, she could almost feel the weight of the book in her hands. She could have it all, just by betraying the trust of Ural and Grond. She looked from the glowing Heartstone, which had now appeared as a faint pulse of light in the vision, to the book with her name on it. For a long, terrible moment, she was suspended between two futures. Then she looked the seeker in the eye, her voice clear and devoid of doubt. "True understanding is not a prize to be won," she said. "It is a trust to be honored. You offer me fame for a weapon. I choose the silence of a protected world over the applause of a doomed one. Take your empty glory." The moment the words left her lips, the grand hall, the book, and the seeker shattered into a million shards of light. The oppressive mist was gone. The archway behind her dissolved into shimmering motes of dust. Before her, resting on a pedestal of pure, gentle light, was the Heartstone of Ural. It was a crystal that seemed to hold a captured sunset within it, pulsing with a slow, deep rhythm that echoed in her very bones. It was not a tool, it was a soul. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched, not in greed, but in reverence. Just as her fingers were about to touch its warm surface, the entire summit heaved. A thunderous crack echoed through the peaks. She spun around. Below, swarming up the final cliff face using glistening, dark ropes of energy, were the seekers of Ascendancy. They had not been stopped. They had followed her through the mountain's defenses, and they were here. The seekers swarmed the summit, their black robes like stains against the pristine stone. Their leader, a woman named Morwin, stepped forward, her voice a blade of polished ice. "Give us the Heartstone, scholar. Refuse, and we will bring this entire peak down upon your head and the sanctuary below." The threat was not empty. As she spoke, her followers raised their hands, and dark, jagged energy crackled around them, biting into the mountain rock and leaving scorched, weeping wounds. This was not a battle for Lyra to fight with strength. She was one woman against a cotter of warriors. But as the first bolt of corrupted magic screamed toward her, her training took over. She dropped into the meditative stillness Finn had taught her, her focus becoming a lens. She did not raise a hand to strike back. Instead, She visualized a shield, not of metal, but of pure, calm intention, a wall of resonant peace. The dark energy shattered against it, but the effort was immense, a drain on her very spirit. She could not hold them off forever. Each defensive pulse left her weaker, while their assault scarred the ancient mountain, the stone itself crying out in silent agony. A desperate realization crystallized in her mind. To fight their corruption with more force was to join their destructive dance. She could not win this way. So she made a choice that defied every instinct of self-preservation. As another volley of attacks raked the summit, she turned her back on the Seekers, a gesture of ultimate trust or madness. She placed her hands on the Heartstone of Ural, not to claim its power, but to ask for a sliver of its grace. She did not channel its energy as a weapon. Instead, she focused it downward, into the mountain itself, pouring that immense, ancient vitality into the wounds the Seekers had torn. It was an act of profound healing. Where the black energy had festered, new, smooth stone welled up, sealing the gashes. Pale, bioluminescent moss spread in an instant, covering the scars with a soft, living light. The mountain shuddered, not in pain, but in awakening. From the stone itself, forms began to coalesce. Tall, slender figures of granite and crystal, the ancient spirits of the peak. They had slept through the ages, guardians of this sacred place, and the Seeker's violation had been an alarm. But it was Lyra's act of restoration, her use of ultimate power to mend rather than break, that earned their allegiance. They turned their luminous, stony gaze upon the Seekers. There was no battle. The mountain spirits simply advanced, and where they walked, the very rock became the enemy. The ground shifted under the Seekers' feet, crevices opening to swallow their dark energy whole. Their corrupted magic fizzled and died against the living mountain. Confusion and a primal geologic fear broke their ranks. Morwin screamed in fury, but it was a useless sound against the patient, immovable will of the awakened earth. The Seekers were driven back, scrambling down the cliffs in a desperate, chaotic retreat. Silence returned to the summit, deep and whole. Lyra stood trembling, the Heartstone pulsing warmly in her hands. Its light grew brighter, no longer a captured sunset, but a brilliant dawn. That light flooded her mind, and a new vision unfolded. She saw not a desolate peak, but a city teeming with life, built atop a foundation of incredible age. And deep beneath its bustling streets and vibrant plazas, pulsing in rhythm with the footsteps of thousands above, was the second Heartstone. It was Grond's, the earth mover, slumbering in the dark beneath a living city, its peace now the most fragile thing in the world. Silverhaven was a city built upon its own bones. Its grand marble plazas and bustling markets sat directly atop the weathered foundations of a civilization so old its name was dust. Lyra felt the truth of it beneath her feet, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated up through the cobblestones, the slow, steady pulse of Grond's Heartstone. It was not a myth. The city's famous hot springs and perpetually warm streets were not natural wonders. They were geothermal vents, gently heated by the slumbering power of the earth mover itself. The entire, vibrant metropolis was living on borrowed energy, a garden flourishing in the warmth of a sleeping volcano. Her first view of the ruling council confirmed her deepest fears. The chamber was a cacophony of conflicting interests. Lord Valerius, a man whose sharp features mirrored his sharper mind, spoke of strange energy fluctuations in the lower districts, his eyes flicking toward the floor as if he could sense the presence beneath them. He was countered by the booming voice of High Provost Corbin, a man draped in silks who dismissed such talk as superstitious nonsense, insisting Silverhaven's prosperity was the result of their own superior ingenuity and hard work. The division was stark and dangerous. Corbin's faction, she soon learned, was lavishly funded by anonymous benefactors whose description matched the seekers of Ascendancy perfectly. They were not just denying the truth, they were being paid to protect a secret they planned to exploit. Lyra knew then that whispering in shadows would not be enough. The people of this city, going about their daily lives, were unwitting tenants in a house whose foundations were not theirs to control. They had a right to know the source of their warmth, their light, their very life. To remain silent was to make their choice for them, so she stepped into the center of the council chamber, her voice cutting through the political squabbles. She did not speak of monsters or myths. She spoke of the deep earth, of a benevolent power that had willingly gone to sleep to allow life to flourish, and of the delicate balance that now fueled their city. She held up the pulsing Heartstone of Ural as proof, its light casting long shadows in the hall. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any roar. Then the uproar began. Corbin was on his feet, his face purple with feigned outrage as he denounced her as a heretic and a charlatan, a sorceress trying to undermine the city's stability with dangerous lies. He called for the guards, his demand echoed by his allies on the council. The trap had sprung. Only a swift intervention from Lord Valerius, who created a momentary distraction, allowed Lyra to slip from the chamber, the cries of heresy ringing in her ears. She was now a fugitive in the city she had come to save, forced to flee into the one place its prosperous citizens never ventured, the ancient, water-worn canals that snaked like stone veins beneath the streets. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and minerals, the only light coming from faint fungi clinging to the walls. Somewhere in this dripping darkness, hidden deeper than the sewers and the forgotten crypts, was the chamber holding Grond's Heartstone. And she was not the only one searching for it. The echoes of heavy, armored boots and harsh voices now joined the steady drip of water, signaling that Corbin's guards, and likely the seekers who pulled his strings, were already descending into the deep, determined to claim the Earth Mover's power before she could secure it. The stone veins of the Undercity pulsed with a deep, rhythmic hum that resonated in Lyra's very bones. She moved through the dripping darkness, her senses tuned not to sight, but to the subtle currents of power flowing through the ancient waterways. Following the emanations of the Heartstone was like tracking a melody only she could hear, a low, grounding bass note that grew stronger with every twist and turned through the labyrinth of forgotten machinery. The path led her to a vast cavern, and what she found there stole her breath. It was not a hidden chamber or a simple pedestal. The Heartstone of Grond was the chamber. It formed the very core of a magnificent geothermal engine, a crystalline heart at the center of a web of glowing, molten rock and polished, ancient conduits. The beautiful, terrifying engine pulsed with a raw, earth-shaping power, and in a flash of understanding, she knew the truth. This was not merely a source of warmth for the city above. Its steady, resonant hum was a stabilizing force, a counterweight that held the very tectonic plates of the region in a peaceful, delicate balance. To remove it would be to invite earthquakes and volcanic fury on an unimaginable scale. Leaving it unprotected, however, was to hand a world-ending trigger to the Seekers. She could not move it, and she could not abandon it. Her only choice was to protect it right where it stood. Drawing upon the deep, resonant memories from the Chamber of Echoes, she began to weave. This was not a spell of force, but a song of silence and concealment, a guardian ward designed to hide the core's brilliant signature from any who would seek to find it with corrupt intent. She sang the old tones, her voice harmonizing with the hum of the stone, her hands tracing patterns of light in the air that settled over the geothermal core like a gentle shroud. But such a permanent, powerful ward required an anchor, a sacrifice to give it enduring strength. The knowledge of the price came to her as clearly as the ward patterns themselves. To secure the shield, she had to bind a portion of her own life energy to it, forever. It was not a decision she hesitated over. Closing her eyes, she focused on the vibrant core of her own being, that essential spark of self, and she willingly, deliberately, unraveled a thread of it, weaving that piece of her own spirit directly into the protective ward. A wave of profound weakness washed over her, a permanent dulling of her own vitality, as the ward flared with a soft, final light, and then settled, becoming one with the cavern, invisible and immovable. As the shield solidified, a deep, grateful tremor ran through the stone beneath her feet, a sensation that was not a sound, but a feeling, the acknowledgement of the slumbering Grond. In that moment, a fundamental truth crystallized in her exhausted mind. These forgotten beasts were not monsters to be slain or gods to be worshipped. They were the foundational forces of the world itself, living continents and breathing storms who had chosen a great silence so that a more fragile world could have its chance to live. The hum of the two Heartstones became a conversation. Alone in the silent cavern beneath Silverhaven, Lyra felt their energies intertwine, a chord of sky and earth that resonated deep within her spirit. It was an invitation. Closing her eyes, she did not seek a single voice, but opened herself to the chorus, and the chorus answered, ancient consciousness, vast and slow as tectonic plates, brushed against her mind. She was not speaking to individual monsters. She was communing with facets of a single, fractured world soul. The great beasts were not rivals. They were fundamental forces given form. Ural was not simply a flying terror. It was the embodiment of the primal sky, of atmosphere and breath. Grond was not a mere mountain maker. It was the living concept of the foundation, of stability and patience. Their ages of dominance were not wars for supremacy, but simply the epochs when their particular aspect of nature was the world's most vital, expressive force. This profound unity was shattered by a sharp, discordant note of alarm. The voices showed her a third fragment of their shared soul, a being of pure, dynamic change named Sela. Where Ural was the sky and Grond the earth, Sela was the storm, the catalyst, the unpredictable wind that scatters seeds and topples kingdoms. Its Heartstone lay unguarded, and the Seekers, armed with the resonance of her own recent actions, were closing in on its location. To them, Sela represented not a force of nature, but the ultimate weapon of chaos, a storm that could be directed to erase nations. Lyra understood then that her old goal of hiding these powers was incomplete, a reaction born of fear. These were not weapons to be locked away. They were partners in a cosmic balance who had willingly stepped aside. Her pledge to the council was new. "I will not bury Sela," she vowed into the chorus of ancient minds. "I will find a way for the storm to sing in harmony with the world it helped create." The acknowledgement from the world soul was immediate and overwhelming. A sliver of their combined awareness flooded into her, a lens that shifted her perception forever. She could now feel the subtle pressure of approaching weather systems, taste the metallic tang of distant lightning on the air, and sense the deep, restless energy lines that crisscross the world. This gift, however, came with a terrible price. To the seekers, whose senses were tuned to such energies, she now shone like a lone star in a dead calm night, a brilliant beacon of the very power they coveted. Her solitary quest had just become a race for survival, with every step illuminated for her enemies. Guided by the gentle, insistent pull of Sela's essence, she turned her back on the deep earth and ascended to the surface. Her destination was the Tempest Plains, a vast, windswept expanse where the sky was a permanent, churning tapestry of gray, and the air crackled with potential. As she took her first steps onto that open land, a gust of wind wrapped around her, not with violence, but with a curious, almost sentient touch. It was a whisper, a name, a summons. The storm was waiting. The wind on the Tempest Plains was a living entity, a constant, roaring pressure that threatened to flatten her. Lightning did not just strike here, it danced, lancing the bruised sky and hitting the same scorched patches of earth with a rhythmic, almost musical regularity. The air itself crackled, raising the hairs on her arms and filling her mouth with the taste of ozone and raw power. This was not a place where a Heartstone could be hidden in a chamber or on a pedestal. The entire plane was the vessel. Her newly attuned senses confirmed it. The chaotic energy was not random. It was focused, swirling around a central point miles ahead, a towering, perpetual tornado that ripped at the sky, its dark funnel a column of concentrated fury. This was Sela, not a creature holding a stone, but a consciousness made of storm. To reach it, to even attempt communication, she would have to walk directly into its heart. The rational part of her mind screamed in protest. Every instinct told her to flee the crushing winds and the deafening thunder, but the chorus of the world soul within her hummed in resonance with the tempest, a thread of connection that felt more real than the ground beneath her feet. The choice was absolute. She could either let her human fear consume her, or she could surrender to the trust she had placed in that deeper connection. Closing her eyes against the blinding dust, she took a deliberate step forward, then another, walking not away from the storm, but into its raging embrace. It was an act of faith that felt like suicide. The wind tore at her clothes, the noise was a physical assault, and stinging debris pelted her skin. She focused on the stillness Finn had taught her on the mountain, on the calm she had used to heal the corrupted bear, on the resonant chord of Ural and Grond that was now a part of her. She did not fight the chaos. She let it flow through her, acknowledging its power without being broken by it. And then the violence ceased. She passed through an invisible boundary into the eye of the storm. The silence was as shocking as the noise had been. She stood in a cylinder of perfect, preternatural calm, the walls a swirling maelstrom of black cloud and flickering lightning. Hovering in the center of this sanctuary was not a monster, but a being of shimmering, translucent air and captured light, its form constantly shifting like a living aurora. This was the core of Sela. It did not speak in words, but in sensations, a flood of impressions that filled her mind. She felt the exhilarating freedom of the gale, the cleansing purpose of the rain, the necessary destruction of the lightning that made way for new growth. Beneath it all, she sensed a deep, restless yearning. It was a force of immense change, but it had no direction, no partnership. The Seeker's desire to dominate this, to chain the storm and point it like a weapon, was a grotesque perversion. They saw a tool, Lyra saw a soul. As this understanding flowed between them, a profound shift occurred. The raging tempest surrounding the eye began to quiet, the wind slowing from a scream to a whisper, the lightning fading from violent strikes to soft, internal pulses of light within the clouds. The storm was listening. In that newfound silence, a different presence brushed against her enhanced senses, a cold, grasping hunger that felt like a tear in the world's fabric. She turned her gaze toward the edge of the plains. The Seekers had arrived. A cold, grasping hunger tore through the air, silencing the last whispers of the storm. Morwin and her Seekers stood at the edge of the plains, their forms dark and sharp against the bruised sky. They did not charge. They began a ritual. A device of obsidian and crackling wire unfolded like a metallic flower from their midst, its core pulsing with a void-like darkness that actively drank the light from the world. As its hum grew, the vibrant gold of the plains grasses bleached to a sickly gray. The very wind died, not in peace, but in a strangled gasp, the sudden quiet more terrifying than any roar. The land itself was withering under this artificial stillness, and far to the east, she could feel the backlash on natural hail pounding fertile fields, and unseasonal frost killing blossoming orchards in distant valleys. The natural order was unraveling at the seams. Lyra knew she could not fight them with the storm's own rage. To do so would be to become the very weapon they sought to create. Sela's anguish pressed against her mind, a hurricane of betrayed feeling, threatening to explode outward and scour the land clean in a final, desperate act of self-destruction. She had to stop this without violence. Stepping forward, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying on the dead air, she did not shout a challenge at Morwin. She spoke to the woman she might have once been. "You sought answers," she said, her words laced with the sliver of world soul awareness she carried. "Let me show you what you are truly trying to bind." She reached out with her mind, not to attack, but to offer. She poured the chorus of the ancients into Morwin's consciousness. It was not a vision of power, but of profound beauty. She showed her the silent, patient love in Grond's foundations, the sorrowful sacrifice in Ural's sky, the joyful, chaotic necessity of Sela's reign. She showed her the intricate, breathtaking balance their silence made possible. The cities, the forests, the fragile, singing lives of everything that had come after. And then she showed the alternative, the barren future Morwin's path created. A world of absolute control, where the wind did not blow and the rain did not fall unless commanded. A sterile, silent planet under a boot of stolen power, empty of all wonder and life. For a single, suspended moment, Morwin's unwavering conviction shattered. The hard light of fanaticism in her eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning, horrific comprehension. She saw the dead world at the end of her quest, and a choked sound of denial escaped her lips. This hesitation was a quake that split her followers. Some, whose hunger for dominion was absolute, screamed at her to finish the ritual. Others, those who had followed her in a misguided search for truth and order, recoiled from the desolation in the vision, their faith broken. The binding ritual faltered. The obsidian device stuttered, its dark pulse skipping a beat, and in that fractured second of confusion, Sela's suppressed energy did not erupt as a weapon. It released as a great, shuddering sigh. The sterile silence broke, not with thunder, but with the gentle, percussive rhythm of the first fat drops of rain. A cleansing downpour washed over the bleached plains, the gray lifting as color seeped back into the grass and stone. It was a baptism, not a battle, the land drinking deeply after a long thirst. The storm had been offered partnership, not a chain, and it had chosen renewal. Rain fell on Morwin's face, washing away the ash and the certainty of a lifetime. She turned from Lyra, her gaze falling upon her second in command, a man whose eyes still burned with the cold fire of ambition. "Finish the ritual," he demanded, his voice a snarl against the gentle downpour. "We are so close to victory," but Morwin did not raise a weapon. Her hands, which had once channeled such destructive power, moved with a new, deliberate purpose. She stepped toward the obsidian device, its dark pulse now a frantic, dying flicker, and with a sharp, precise gesture, she shattered its central crystal core. The resulting silence was not one of peace, but of a terrible, final severance. The seekers of Ascendancy broke like glass on stone. A handful, their faith as broken as the device, simply dropped their staves, their will to fight extinguished by the vision of the dead world they had almost made. But the hardened core, led by the furious second, backed away into the fading storm, their vows of revenge a poison on the wind. They would continue, they swore, but now without the burden of doubt or mercy. Lyra watched the fracture, the weight of this new reality settling upon her. She looked at Morwin, who stood empty-handed amidst the ruin of her own life's work. The choice was immediate and profound. To see her as a prisoner was to perpetuate the cycle of conflict. To offer trust was an immense risk, a gamble that the glimpse of truth she had shared had taken root. She walked toward the former enemy, not as a victor, but as an equal burdened by knowledge. "Your understanding of their methods is a weapon we lack," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I will not ask you to fight them. I ask you to help us protect what remains." She extended an invitation not to a prison cell, but to the Guardians, to use her formidable intellect and insight for preservation, to become a builder of shields instead of a forger of swords. Morwin did not speak for a long moment, the rain mingling with the tears that finally fell. She had spent a lifetime seeking power over the world, only to be shown that true strength lay in understanding its delicate, beautiful heart. She accepted the offer with a single, slow nod, a gesture of surrender that felt more like a beginning than an end. That trust, forged in the storm's aftermath, yielded a terrible and vital prize. With Morwin's knowledge, the scope of the remaining threat became terrifyingly clear. The rogue seekers were not scattering in defeat. They were regrouping with a new, ruthless focus, and their target was the Heartstone of the final Forgotten Beast, a being unlike any other. They sought Niam, the Weaver, a creature not of sky, earth, or storm, but of spirit and memory itself, and the location of its Heartstone made all previous dangers seem almost simple. It lay in the one place where time itself had simply stopped, a city forever holding its breath, waiting for an end or a beginning that never came. They had to journey to the Silent City. The Silent City was a wound in the fabric of the world. One moment, Lyra and the others were walking through a sun-dappled forest, and the next, they stepped into a perpetual, gray twilight. The air was thick and heavy, swallowing all sound. Before them stretched a metropolis of pale stone, its towers frozen mid-collapse, its streets littered with citizens caught in a single, terrified instant. A mother reached for a child who would never be caught. A merchant's spilled fruit hung in the air like jewels. The ghosts of the past replayed their final moments in a silent, heartbreaking loop. Morwin, her face pale, whispered that this was the cost of unchecked ambition, a place where time itself had been a casualty. The rules were immediately clear. A guardian scout, stumbling over a loose cobblestone, let out a sharp gasp of surprise. The gray air around him shimmered violently, and for a terrifying second, his own form flickered, becoming as translucent as the ghosts. He had to consciously calm his breathing before he solidified again. Any strong emotion, any sudden action, could shatter the delicate stasis and erase them from existence. They had to move with the patience of glaciers, their very feelings a threat. The rogue seekers, however, had no such patience. Deeper in the city, they could see the flicker of their crude energy weapons, hear the muffled thumps of their destructive searches. Wherever they went, they left behind spiderwebs of cracks in the air, fractures in the timeless field that pulsed with a sickly purple light. Each crack threatened to destabilize the entire city, a cascade of temporal collapse that would consume everything, including the seekers themselves and their reckless hunger. Watching the ghosts repeat their final, desperate moments, a profound understanding settled over Lyra. This was not a city that held a Heartstone. The city was the Heartstone. Niam, the Weaver, was not a beast of flesh, but the living embodiment of memory and spirit. This entire place was its captured consciousness, a collective soul frozen at the moment of its greatest trauma. To find the stone was not to locate a physical object. It was to heal the ancient wound. The only way to secure Niam was to mend the catastrophe that had shattered it. The stakes of such an act were terrifying. Healing the city would mean releasing all these trapped ghosts, allowing time to resume its flow after centuries of stillness. What would that do to the present? Would the city simply vanish, its history finally concluding, or would it erupt into their timeline, a cataclysm of catching up? It was an unpredictable wave that would wash across the shores of the now, but leaving the city to the seekers was not an option. Their fracturing of the timeline would be an absolute, final erasure. Taking a deep, calming breath, Lyra reached out with her spirit, seeking the central thread of the city's pain, the core memory that held all the others in its agonized grip. As she prepared to pour her own consciousness into that ancient wound, a triumphant shout echoed from the central plaza. The lead rogue seeker, Draven, stood before a pulsing, crystalline tree that grew from the city's heart, its branches made of solidified light and sorrow. He had found the nexus, the focal point of the memory crystal. With a cry of victory, he raised his weapon, not to heal, but to shatter it, believing the power released in the ensuing chaos would be his to claim. The gray stone of the plaza dissolved into a river of light and sound. Lyra plunged into the city's memory web, a psychic tapestry woven from every laugh, every tear, and every whispered hope of its people. She was no longer a visitor in a frozen city, but a ghost walking through its vibrant, living history. The air hummed with the warmth of 1,000 sunlit days, the scent of baking bread from a busy market, the joyous chaos of a festival. She felt the profound, simple love of a family sharing a meal, the fierce pride of an artisan finishing a masterpiece. These were not just images, they were experiences, flooding her senses and saturating her spirit with the beautiful, fragile weight of lives fully lived. Niam was not a monster to be feared. It was the sacred keeper of all these lost stories, a library of souls. But a dissonant, sharp pain began to tear through the harmony. Draven was here too. He did not navigate the web, he hacked through it. Where Lyra felt joy, he weaponized grief, summoning memories of a child's final, fevered breath, and projecting them as walls of searing despair. Where she found love, he twisted it into the agony of betrayal, creating labyrinths of paranoia and fear. His presence was a sickness in the psychic landscape, a constant assault meant to break her will and trap her in the city's collective sorrow. She could feel his own spirit, a knot of rage and pain, feeding on the negativity he cultivated. Fighting him with force would only deepen the wounds he was inflicting on this delicate spiritual fabric. A desperate, radical idea formed in her heart. As another wave of manufactured grief threatened to drown her, she did not push back with a shield of her own calm. Instead, she reached through the psychic maelstrom, not for a painful memory from the city, but for a flicker of light from Draven's own past. She searched the echoes of his spirit for a moment he had buried, a single, unguarded instant of pure humanity. She found it, a memory, small and bright as a forgotten star, surfaced in the web. A young Draven, before ambition and bitterness had carved him into a weapon, was kneeling in the mud, his hands gently cupped around a wounded bird. There was no audience, no reward, only a boy's innate compassion, a silent act of care for a fragile life. Lyra did not weaponize this memory. She simply offered it back to him, holding it before his consciousness like a mirror. The effect was catastrophic to his rage. The walls of despair flickered. The snarling energy around him stuttered and died. For one breathtaking second, the hardened fanatic was gone, replaced by the ghost of that boy, his eyes wide with shock and a profound, forgotten vulnerability. The memory of his own kindness was a key to a door he had sealed shut centuries ago. It was the opening she needed. While Draven stood immobilized, grappling with the ghost of his better self, Lyra surged forward. The path to the central crystal was clear, but the entire memory web was shuddering, the fragile stasis of the silent city fracturing under the strain of their conflict. The gray twilight outside the web began to pulse with violent, unstable energy. Time itself was groaning, ready to snap. She reached the nexus, the crystalline tree that was the heart of Niam. It pulsed not with power, but with a deep, exhausted sorrow. The choice was now absolute. She could try to reinforce the stasis, to preserve this beautiful, agonized museum forever. Or she could do what the city's soul truly needed. Placing her hands upon the crystal, she poured every ounce of her energy, every lesson from Urul's sacrifice and Grond's silence, not into holding the past captive, but into granting it release. She did not command the city to be still. She whispered to it that it was finally safe to let go. The crystalline tree dissolved into a gentle rain of light, and the silent city sighed its last breath. The gray twilight shattered, the frozen towers and terrified ghosts, softening into a cascade of shimmering memories that rose into the sky like a flock of birds released from a cage. The agonized loops of their final moments unspooled into peace, their stories no longer trapped, but carried upward on a warm, forgiving wind. Where a metropolis of sorrow had stood, there was now only a vast, empty plain, the earth soft and rich with the scent of rain and new beginnings. Niam, the weaver, was free, its essence no longer a trapped heartstone, but a gentle presence in the breeze, a whisper that would forever tell the stories of the lost to those who knew how to listen. Draven knelt in the fresh grass, the weapon fallen from his limp hand. The fanatical fire in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a hollowed-out remorse as he watched the last of the city's light fade into the heavens. He was a man unmade, his life's purpose revealed as a monstrous lie. The remaining rogue seekers, their connection to the destructive energy severed, scattered into the wilderness like insects whose hive had been destroyed, their power broken and their cohesion lost. Lyra walked toward Draven, not with vengeance in her heart, but with a profound and weary pity. She did not offer him chains or a cell. She offered him the truth. "I spare you," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Your prison is not one I need to build. It is the memory of that boy with the bird and the knowledge of the beauty you tried to erase. Your penance is to carry that and to find a single, small act of good to do with the life you have left." The immediate, world-ending threat was over. The great beasts were secure, their power integrated into the world's living balance. Yet the victory felt incomplete, the silence that followed too deep. By healing such a profound wound in the world's soul, Lyra had not simply restored an old order. She had altered the fundamental equilibrium, creating a new, fragile state that demanded a new understanding. The ancient cycle of sacrifice and slumber was complete, but what came next? As the last of the memory light faded from the sky, a new presence arrived at the edge of the plain. Thuron, the Elder Guardian, stood with a dozen of his order, their faces etched with awe and a trace of fear. They had felt the great shift from across the world, a tremor in the spirit of everything. Thuron's milky eyes found Lyra, and he bowed his head in deep respect. "The covenant is remade, child," he said, his voice a rustle of leaves. "The old balance is past. You are called to the world's heart, to speak for what comes next." The path to the world heart was not a journey of distance, but of intent. One moment, Lyra stood on the plain where a city had been, and the next she was stepping into a grove where the air itself shimmered with life. This was the nexus where all the world's ley lines converged, a place of impossible, quiet power. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle, their leaves whispering in a language older than words. Waiting for her within the circle were the Elder Guardians, their faces solemn, and beside them, the presence of the beasts. Ural was not a winged terror here, but a shimmer of light in the canopy. Grond was a deep, patient hum in the soil. Sela was a gentle breeze, and Niam was the very scent of memory on the air. They had gathered for a conclave, a meeting to decide the fate of the balance Lyra had remade. The decision that flowed from the gathering was as profound as it was simple. The age of the great beasts, slumbering in isolated silence, was over. Their long sacrifice had served its purpose, granting the world its fragile childhood. Now, a new age of integration would begin. Their essences would not be locked away, but would instead flow gently through the world's ley lines, a subtle guidance woven into the wind, the stone, and the spirit of all living things, meant to exist in harmony with mortal kind. Not all the guardians welcomed this new proximity. An elder named Cadel voiced the fear that chilled many hearts. He argued that to bring such power so close to mortal hands was to invite the same catastrophe all over again. What is to stop our children's children from seeing this not as a partnership, but as a resource to be mined? He asked, his voice tight with worry. The temptation to dominate, to control, is a seed that never dies. It was a valid fear, one that acknowledged the darkest parts of mortal nature. In the face of this tension, Lyra did not argue. She proposed. She stepped into the center of the circle, feeling the warm approval of the beasts and the wary eyes of the guardians upon her. "We cannot protect the world by hiding its heart," she said. "We can only protect it by teaching its value. I propose we found a new order, the Keepers of the Covenant. Its members will be drawn from both the guardians and from those seekers who, like Morwin, have turned from domination to stewardship. Their purpose will not be to guard a secret, but to teach a balance, to show how to listen to the wind, to understand the language of the stone, and to respect the stories carried on the breeze." The stakes of this new path were terrifyingly high. Its success would not be guaranteed by the power of the beasts, but by the wisdom, restraint, and vigilance of mortals. It placed a colossal responsibility on the shoulders of every person who would choose to listen, to learn, and to protect the delicate symbiosis they were now offered. As the conclave considered her words, a deep, resonant agreement settled over the grove. The world heart itself seemed to bloom with their decision. Flowers of light blossomed from the earth, and the trees glowed with a soft, internal radiance. Lyra felt the approval of the beasts not as a distant echo, but as a warm, sustaining presence that filled her, healing the last of her weariness and the permanent dullness left by her sacrifice in the Undercity. She was no longer just their witness, she had become their voice. The title of First Keeper settled upon Lyra's shoulders not as a crown, but as a quiet responsibility. Her first official act was a journey of return, visiting each of the hallowed grounds where the world soul had once slumbered in isolation. At the summit where Urul's Heartstone had rested, she did not raise a fortress. She helped clear a space for a simple stone platform, open to the sky. At the geothermal core beneath Silverhaven, she established a meditation chamber where the deep hum of Grond could be felt as a steadying presence. These were not temples of worship, but sanctuaries of listening, places designed for learning and reflection. Word spread, carried by the wind itself it seemed, and a quiet migration began. Scholars arrived with scrolls, not to dissect power, but to understand the language of the earth. Mages came to feel the subtle flows of energy, learning to weave their art in harmony with Sela's breath. Farmers and artisans traveled for days simply to sit in the presence of Niam's gentle echoes, finding inspiration for their crafts in the whispers of ancient stories. They came not to take, but to learn. Guiding such a diverse and fervent gathering was a delicate task. Lyra often found herself mediating heated debates. A group of philosophers argued that the great beasts were divine entities whose whims must be placated with ritual. A faction of engineers saw them as a new, untapped energy source to be meticulously cataloged and utilized. She had to gently, patiently dismantle these old ways of thinking. They are not gods to be appeased, she would explain, standing before a captivated audience at a sanctuary. They are the elder members of a shared home. We do not worship the river that gives us water, but we learn its currents, respect its power, and keep its banks clean. This is the same. It is a partnership, and our role is one of stewardship. The most profound decision she made in those early years was to pick up a pen. Knowing that her own singular experience could become a rigid dogma, she chose to record her entire journey. She wrote of her fears and failures with the same honesty as her triumphs, presenting the story not as an unchangeable history, but as a testimony, a first chapter meant to be questioned and built upon by those who came after. She insisted that copies be made and shared freely, ensuring that the knowledge of the covenant was a seed scattered to the wind, not a treasure locked in a vault. This work laid the cornerstone for a new era, one built on the profound, understanding that the world was a living, conscious partner. Yet Lyra never rested easily. In the quiet of the night, she would remember the cold fire in the eyes of the rogue seekers. She knew the temptation to dominate, to simplify the beautiful complexity of the world into a mere tool, was a shadow that would always linger at the edge of the firelight. The Keeper's vigilance, she taught, was not a temporary duty, but an eternal one, a promise passed from one generation to the next. Years flowed into decades, and the sanctuaries she founded did more than just endure. They blossomed. The one at the Tempest Plains became a center for revolutionary weather sciences, where scholars learned to read the sky's intentions. The library, near the Sunken woods, housed composers whose music was inspired by the forest's deep, slow songs. A new renaissance of art, science, and magic was flourishing, all of it subtly inspired by the Forgotten Beasts and the ages they once dominated, their legacy no longer one of fear, but of boundless inspiration. The university gates stood before her, not as a barrier this time, but as an invitation. Lyra, her hair now touched with silver, but her eyes holding the same quiet fire, walked the familiar paths as a different person. She carried no weapon, but a stack of bound manuscripts, the complete record of her journey. Her return was not a victory lap, but a homecoming of a different kind. She had come to offer her life's work to the very institution that had cast her out. The lecture hall was packed, a sea of faces both young and old, buzzing with a mixture of skepticism and intense curiosity. She did not speak of monsters or magic. She spoke of ecology, of symbiosis, of the interconnected signatures of energy that modern instruments were only just beginning to detect. She presented the Forgotten Beasts not as myths, but as foundational forces, as essential to the world's health as the atmosphere or the tectonic plates. She explained that communion was not a mystical ritual, but a form of deep listening, a disciplined practice of attuning one's senses to the subtle languages of the world. The silence in the hall was profound, a stark contrast to the uproar she had faced decades before. After her talk, the senior archivist, who had once confiscated her notes and ended her career, approached her. His face, once a mask of cold authority, was now etched with a humble awe. He did not offer an apology with words, but with an action. He formally proposed the establishment of a new department, a branch of study dedicated to the principles she had outlined, and asked her to be its founding director. Of course, not all were convinced. A stout, renowned professor of antiquities stood, his voice dripping with academic scorn. He demanded to know where her peer-reviewed data was, how one could possibly quantify a conversation with the wind. "This is precisely why we need this department," Lyra replied, her voice patient and steady, "to develop the methods and the language to study what we have only just remembered exists. Your skepticism is welcome. I invite you, and any who share your doubts, to come to the sanctuaries. Do not take my word for it. Come and feel the hum in the stone for yourself." This open-handed challenge disarmed his anger. The prospect of direct observation, of evidence, was a language he understood. Many of her most vocal critics took her up on the offer, traveling to the various sites with their measuring devices and their rigid frameworks. They returned changed. The professor who had challenged her spent a week at the geothermal chamber beneath Silverhaven and came back speaking not of magical energy, but of a stable, anomalous resonance that correlated with the city's seismic calm. His conversion from skeptic to staunch advocate was more powerful than any blind faith could have been. As she walked through the quiet university halls later that evening, now a respected figure in a place that had once rejected her, a familiar sensation brushed against her cheek. It was a gentle, insistent breeze that carried the scent of distant rain. It was Sela, and the message was not one of storm or chaos, but of gentle sustenance. The whisper spoke of a soft, nurturing rain now falling over the drought-stricken farmlands to the south, a blessing timed with perfect, natural grace. The world was not just speaking, it was cooperating. The seismic reports should have been a dull catalog of the Earth's ordinary restlessness, yet a pattern snagged Lyra's attention, a sequence of tremors so faint and rhythmic, they were almost a signature. They pulsed from the Serafina Trench, a scar in the ocean floor, so deep and isolated, it was a void on all her maps of beastly resonance. This was not the familiar hum of Grond, or the playful energy of Sela. This was a heartbeat from a place that should have had none. She reached out with her spirit, casting a questioning thread into the chorus of the world's soul. The answer that returned was not a clear voice, but a sensation of immense, cold pressure, and a memory so old it felt like the crumbling of stone into sand. They showed her a presence that slumbered in the absolute dark, a being that had settled into the world's first seabed when the very rock was still cooling. It was a creature of the abyss, so ancient that even Ural and Grond knew it only as a rumor in the deep, a foundational piece of the world that had been sleeping since before the first age was named. Its name, if it could be said, was Ethon, the Abyssal. The terror of this discovery was its utter lack of malice. Ethon was not stirring with anger or ambition. It was simply turning in its sleep, its colossal form shifting in the tight confines of its ancient bed, but the scale of its body was such that this simple, natural movement sent shockwaves through the oceanic plates. An unintentional shrug from this primordial being could trigger fault lines, heaving the ocean into tsunamis that would erase coastal cities and churn the climate into chaos. This was a problem of pure physics. a disaster born from a being too large for the world it helped form. There could be no battle, no binding, no ward strong enough to contain a force of this magnitude. Their only hope was communication, a plea for stillness. Lyra summoned her most trusted keepers. Morwin arrived with her sharp, tactical mind, already analyzing the logistical nightmare of a deep-sea expedition. Finn came with his steady hands and his intimate knowledge of pressure and terrain. They were a council of war against an enemy that was not an enemy, a team assembled to ask a mountain to please stop breathing. The task was unprecedented. How do you introduce yourself to a consciousness that predates language, that thinks in the slow grind of continents and the chemistry of hydrothermal vents? How do you say hello to a god that has never been awake? As their specially reinforced submersible, the Stargazer, was readied for its descent into the lightless deep, Lyra placed a hand on its cold metal hull. From the world's soul, she felt a tremor that was not her own. A ripple of fear, yes, but beneath it, a profound and aching curiosity. The oldest sibling was waking, and all of creation, from the highest wind to the deepest stone, was holding its breath to see what it would remember. The world outside the viewport vanished into an ink so absolute it felt solid. Their descent into the Seraphina Trench was a slow fall from reality, the last glimmers of sunlit water swallowed by a crushing, silent dark. The only light came from their own powerful beams, cutting through the black to reveal a landscape of alien wonder. Forests of glass sponges, taller than ancient towers, swayed in unseen currents. Jellies pulsed with shifting constellations of internal light, their forms like living galaxies. This was a world that had never known the sun, thriving under a pressure that could turn steel to foil. Morwin monitored the hull integrity with a tense jaw, her fingers tracing the shimmering guardian runes etched into the metal, the only thing holding the abyss at bay. Yet the deeper they went, the more a strange truth dawned. The tremors they tracked were not emanating from a single, monstrous heart. They were the rhythm of the entire trench, a symphony of slow, pulsing life. The sway of a sponge, the collective drift of a million luminous diadems, the very flow of mineral-rich vents. It was all part of one vast, interconnected consciousness. They had not found a beast. They had found a mind as old as the ocean itself, a sentient ecosystem that thought in the geological time of mountain growth and continental drift. Their technology was useless here. How do you shout a question into a conversation that has been ongoing for 1 billion years? Their sonar pings were meaningless static, their magical probes fizzling out against a perception too vast and slow to notice them. They were gnats buzzing at a sleeping giant, and the constant groans of the submersible's frame were a grim reminder that the giant's slumber was restless. Lyra watched a luminescent eel weave a complex pattern through a coral arch, a thought moving through a neural network of impossible scale. "We are speaking the wrong language," she said, her voice quiet in the humming silence. She gave the order that chilled them all: settle on the seafloor and power everything down. All non-essential systems, all active sensors, even the internal lights. We must become as quiet as the deep and listen at its speed, in the profound blackness and silence, with only the sound of their own breath and the occasional terrifying creak from the hull. They began the arduous work of meditation. They had to slow their own frantic human thoughts, to match their mental rhythm to the patient, tectonic pulse of the world around them. Hours bled into a day, then two. The isolation was a psychological acid, eating away at their sanity. Finn fought claustrophobia. Morwin battled the urge to reactivate the systems and flee. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the edges of their consciousness began to blur. They started to feel the deep not as a hostile environment, but as a living body. They perceived the ancient, patient thoughts of the ecosystem, not in words, but in sensations of immense age, of cold, nurturing darkness, of a timeless cycle of life and mineral exchange that had no beginning and sought no end. It was a consciousness of pure being, and its gentle stirring was not malice, but the simple, oblivious stretch of a sleeper. Just as this fragile understanding blossomed, their external lights, on a timed low-power cycle, flickered on. The beams stabbed into the dark, illuminating a sheer cliff face they had not seen before, and the cliff face moved. It was not rock. It was a flank of living stone, crusted with ages of sediment and glowing fungi, so immense it dwarfed their entire field of vision. A single, slow-moving eye, large as their submersible, rotated in its socket of granite flesh, fixing its ancient, indifferent gaze upon them. This was no mere part of the ecosystem. This was its sentinel, its guardian, and it had finally noticed the speck of noise resting on the ocean floor. The Leviathan's eye was a world of its own, a black star in the abyss, holding eons of silent judgment. Its presence did not crush the submersible, but enveloped it, and the pressure that filled the cabin was not of the deep ocean, but of a mind reaching into theirs. The world of the trench vanished, replaced by a psychic arena where their deepest selves were laid bare. Each keeper was pulled into a vision tailored to their soul. Finn saw his broken leg on the mountain, not as an accident, but as a permanent failure that left Lyra to face her destiny alone, a crippling regret that whispered he was never strong enough. Morwin's trial was a crucible of fire and shadow. She was back in her prime with the Seekers, standing triumphant over a captured nexus of power, the adulation of her followers a drug in her veins. The vision offered her a return to that certainty, to the clean, simple clarity of domination. The temptation was a physical ache, a familiar path worn smooth by a lifetime of ambition. For a terrifying moment, she reached for it, her old self rising like a ghost to claim her. But then she saw the consequence reflected in the Leviathan's ancient gaze, the dead world from Lyra's vision, a sterile planet under her own boot. She did not fight the memory or try to hide it. Instead, she turned toward the colossal presence and spoke a vow into the psychic silence. I was that person. I sought to own the world. I choose now to protect it. Her acceptance of her flawed past, offered without excuse, was the key that shattered her personal illusion. Lyra, as the anchor for them all, felt the Leviathan's core question. Why do you disturb the first silence? It was not an accusation, but a plea for understanding from a being that had witnessed the birth of continents. She had no weapon, no argument of force. Her only offering was a memory. She poured the sensation of the world heart in bloom into the Leviathan's consciousness, the feeling of the trees glowing with light, the gentle integration of the beasts, the hopeful faces of the first keepers learning to listen. It was a testament to a covenant remade, a promise of a world learning to live in harmony. The Leviathan's immense attention shifted. The judgmental pressure eased, replaced by a slow, resonant acknowledgement. It showed them the truth. The deep was not stirring out of malice or natural restlessness. The distress was a sympathetic reaction, a deep earth fever caused by a sickness on the surface. The frantic, unbalanced consumption of the surface world, the poisoning of its waters, and the scarring of its lands was sending shockwaves of disharmony all the way to the primordial foundations. The solution was not to calm the abyss, it was to heal the world above. The mission was far greater than they had imagined. With this understanding, the trial ended. The Leviathan's eye slowly closed, and a single, gentle current lifted the stargazer. As it began its ascent, a tendril of the creature's essence, as delicate as sea foam, brushed against the hull, depositing a small, bioluminescent plant that pulsed with a soft, cleansing light. This was its gift, a species unknown to the surface, a deep-sea purifier that could draw toxins from both water and soil. Cradled in the Leviathan's will, their vessel rose through the crushing darkness, not as fugitives, but as messengers. They broke the surface into blinding sunlight, the air tasting thin and strangely empty after the profound presence of the deep. Bobbing on the waves, the tiny plant in their possession glowed with urgent purpose. They had gone to answer a question and had returned with a diagnosis for the entire world. The stargazer's return from the abyss did not mark an end to the journey, but a profound shift in its purpose. The tiny, glowing plant from the deep was more than a specimen. It was a blueprint for healing, a key to a lock no one had known existed. Lyra and the Keepers launched a global initiative, their first act a quiet pilgrimage to the most wounded places on the surface. They did not arrive with grand declarations, but with sleeves rolled up and hands in the earth. Along the banks of a river, so poisoned it flowed the color of rust, they planted the deep-sea purifier. Its roots, guided by the gentle hum of the world's soul, spread through the toxic silt, drawing out the poisons and replacing them with a vibrant, cleansing energy. Within weeks, the water ran clear for the first time in a century, and fish returned to its currents. The same quiet miracle repeated in clear-cut forests, where the Keepers sang the old growth back into the barren soil, and in storm-racked coastal towns, where they soothed the frenetic energy in the air, calming the unnatural hurricanes born of the world's fever. This visible, tangible healing acted as a beacon. People from all walks of life, farmers whose lands were reborn, fishermen whose catches returned, artists and engineers inspired by the new harmony began to join the cause. Stewardship was no longer an abstract philosophy discussed in sanctuaries. It became a universal value, a shared labor of love for a world that was demonstrably, beautifully alive. But such profound change never goes unchallenged. Powerful industrial barons and political figures, whose wealth was built on the very extraction and pollution the Keepers healed, saw the movement not as a renaissance, but as a threat. They spread fear, whispering of economic collapse and lost jobs. Their agents sabotaged restoration sites under cover of night, uprooting the glowing plants and attempting to reignite the very conflicts the world soul had quieted. Faced with this opposition, Lyra made a deliberate choice. She forbade any retaliation, any use of force. Instead, she chose a weapon far more disarming, relentless, patient invitation. She did not argue with the resistors in their boardrooms. She invited them to walk with her along the banks of the newly cleansed river. She asked them to feel the difference in the air, to taste the clean water, to witness the children now playing where only desolation had been. She offered them not a theory, but evidence written in the language of life itself. One by one, the walls of fear and greed crumbled. A timber magnate, standing in a forest he had once ordered cleared, now teeming with new growth and birdsong, broke down in tears, his heart broken open by the sheer, undeniable beauty of what he had been taught to see as a resource. He became one of the initiative's most generous patrons. This great healing created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle. As the surface wounds closed, the world's soul grew stronger and more serene, its renewed vitality flowing back into the ley lines and further accelerating the restoration. The deep tremors from the abyss quieted to a contented hum. Yet this new golden age was not a destination, but a state of constant, unending effort. The balance was not a wall to be built, but a garden to be tended every single day by everyone. As Lyra watched those children laugh and splash in the revitalized river, a fundamental truth settled in her spirit. This was the true dominion, the only kind that could ever last. It was not the dominion of beasts over the land, or of mortals over the beasts. It was the quiet, resilient dominion of life itself, enduring through compassion, cooperation, and an endless, loving watch. The river, once a wound of rust and poison, now flowed with a music so clear it seemed to sing the stones smooth. On its banks, where the deep sea purifier had first taken root, the great sanctuary stood open to the sky, its arches woven from living wood and pale marble. They came from every corner of the known world, a gathering that would have been unthinkable a generation before. The stern-faced industrial baron stood beside the weathered guardian. The former seeker Morwin shared a quiet word with the university scholar who had once denounced her, and the humble farmer who had first trusted the new ways stood shoulder to shoulder with lords and artisans. They were not allies bound by a common enemy, but partners united by a shared purpose, a living tapestry of the covenant made real. Lyra stepped forward to address them, her form illuminated by the gentle light of the sanctuary. She did not stand on a raised platform, but stood among them, her voice carrying on the same breeze that rustled the leaves. "We are not here to celebrate a victory," she said, her gaze sweeping over the diverse assembly. "We are here to affirm a choice, the choice to listen, the choice to mend, the choice to see the world not as a prize to be won, but as a partner to be cherished." She asked them not for pledges or oaths, but for a moment of shared focus. "Close your eyes," she whispered, "and feel the life around you. Feel the river's flow, the strength of the stone, the whisper of the wind. Remember the story that brought us here, and feel the hope we now share for the stories yet to be written." As the crowd fell into a profound, collective silence, a palpable energy began to swell. It was not the chaotic power of a storm or the crushing weight of the deep, but a gentle, rising tide of pure, focused goodwill. You could feel it in the air, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. Lyra, acting as a conduit, gathered this collective intention, this immense and hopeful will, and offered it to the world's soul. The response was instantaneous. The sanctuary's central crystal, a pillar of milky quartz that had stood dormant, suddenly ignited from within. It did not flash or roar. It bloomed with a soft, eternal light, a radiance that was both blindingly bright and impossibly gentle. This was not the captured fury of a Heartstone or the cold gleam of magic. It was the light of balance itself, a beacon born from the unified will of mortals and the grateful acknowledgement of the ancient world. In that moment, every being, from the highest wind rider to the smallest burrowing creature, felt a subtle shift in the fabric of existence. The light was a signal, a declaration written in the language of creation itself. The long ages of dominion, where power meant isolation and control, were irrevocably over. A new chapter had begun, not ruled by the strongest, but nurtured by the collective, conscious guardianship of all. Sunlight fell through the leaves in dappled patterns, warm on Lyra's aged hands. Here in the gardens of the great sanctuary, the air itself hummed with a quiet, vibrant life. Young apprentices moved through the groves, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves and the gentle guidance of their teachers. They were not memorizing dry texts about monsters, but learning to feel the patient strength in the stone beneath their feet and to understand the stories carried on the breeze. The Forgotten Beasts were no longer subjects of fearful myth or academic obsession. They were remembered as the world's first teachers, their essences woven into the very fabric of a living, breathing tapestry. Her own long journey felt like a single thread in that grand design, a path that had begun with a single, defiant question in a dusty archive and had led to the mending of the world's most fundamental story. The scars on the land were healed, but the work was never truly done. It was a rhythm, a constant, gentle practice of listening and tending, passed like a precious gift from one generation to the next. She felt the presence of the ancients not as a distant power, but as a familiar comfort. The deep, grounding hum of Grond in the rich soil, the playful whisper of Sela in the rustling canopy, the gentle sorrow and joy of Niam in the very memories these gardens held. A flicker of color caught her eye, a butterfly, its wings painted with impossible delicacy, drifted on a current of air and settled softly upon her wrinkled finger. It was a tiny, breathing jewel, a creature of exquisite and fleeting beauty, utterly dependent on the health of the world around it. It rested there, wings slowly opening and closing, a perfect, silent testament to the fragile, precious balance she had helped to nurture. It was a balance that demanded eternal vigilance and boundless love. Closing her eyes, Lyra smiled, feeling the sun on her face and the gentle weight of the future on her hand.